is doing, by what Denver and Colorado are doing. And I especially want to thank the Coopers and their whole team for putting on what I know is going to be an absolutely remarkable weekend. I am so privileged to be a part of this. The most challenging part of public speaking for me is that I just get so moved by the beauty of the spirit of the people to be able to stand up here and just see and know that each one of you is doing your own path and your own struggle so profound. And taking the time to come here and meet other people who are doing the same. And Kimberly and I get to travel all over the world, and everywhere we go, this is what we see. This is the hologram.
So this is the hologram. When you're joined with your fellow travelers who are waking up the way you are, know that this is happening in literally millions of communities, millions of rooms, millions of homes all over the world. And it's one of the things that made Kimberly and me more optimistic than we have been in 15 years. So one of the reasons why it's so moving for me to get to have a chance to talk with you like this is that I really deeply, deeply know who you are. And let me give you an example of what I know. Because I know that I'm in a room full of true champions here. Now some of you may be thinking, well, I'm not a champion. I think I'm not some loser. No, picture yourself on a beach. Beautiful sky, waves crashing on the beach, and you're about to go in a race. And you look both ways on the beach, and there's 60 million participants. And then you take off. There you go, into the water. And you're the one who got there first. You are the sperm that made it. That's a lot of intention. So don't ever tell me a single one of you can't make a difference. I know. So Evolve Expo. We're here because of our drive to evolve. So, what are we evolving? What are we evolving toward? Well, I'm going to suggest that we're evolving toward a deeper and deeper knowledge of who we are. Not only our personal identity, but our cosmic identity. To where you think you're in your body, and then as Norman said, you begin to recognize more expansive aura, and then yourself as spirit, yourself as the whole galaxy, and then the whole cosmos. And the boundaries of who you are drop away without losing your center. I think we're evolving toward fulfilling the longing for freedom inside ourselves and simultaneously matching that with the manifestation of the freedom in our 3D, physical, interpersonal, political, international reality. And I don't think those two can be separated, really. And I'm so thrilled to see an expo like this. And we just came from the Conscious Living Expo and Synthesis 2012 before that. And a lot of expos that used to be just music and dance and meditation and so forth, which is fantastic, are now virtually all adding in these vital conversations about how do we match that inner longing for liberty with the outer manifestation of an actual thriving world where everybody gets to be free and prosperous and be healthy. So Larry asked me if I would kind of set the context for the 4 major areas of the expo today. And that would be a privilege. And these are the areas, if you're not familiar already. Free energy. This is only the second conference like this, big conference I've been to, where this has been a focus. And they had a few booths at the Conscious Living Expo. I was amazed and delighted to see it, and had several absolutely phenomenal unknown inventors come up to me. One of them, on my way to an interview, I was getting on the elevator, and he was just right up with you, and he literally gave me his elevator pitch. And then he said, "Here are some colleagues. We came to see if we could meet you, and we have a free energy working device." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." And he says, "In this bag." And he rolls up this white plastic bag, and he wants to show me this thing. And I said, "Well, literally, I've got an interview in 5 minutes. And so we get up to the room, and I get a text, and they're 15 minutes late for the interview. So I said, okay, you got 15 minutes. And so he calls down the lobby. He's got 3 other friends there with a bigger bag, with a bigger device. So they all come up, and they take this thing out, and they put it on a table in my hotel room, and proceed to absolutely blow my mind. This is happening all over the world. I got to visit a lab south of Denver yesterday. That was one of the most inspiring things I've ever experienced. You know, a growing team of brilliant people who are having a good time together and doing phenomenal work at every kind of level of technological and spiritual work you can imagine, and combining the two. It's tremendously exciting, and there are some people here with some devices that can give you a sense of what's coming. I probably wouldn't expect a full-blown over Unity device to be operating in the hall today, because it would simply be too dangerous. What I have seen is the people who are showing things in public are doing a tremendous service by educating people and showing some of the principles by which they operate. So make sure and visit those booths. So here's the key, and I want to address this in all 4 areas. So under the guise of national security, the would-be controllers are suppressing clean, safe, abundant access to energy. And some of you who may be new to this might be saying, oh, they wouldn't do that. Those of you who have been in this a little longer, you know that one drifts off into the distance so you can barely hear it. So I want to mention a few other things that are going on so that hopefully it helps us recognize the pattern, because the onslaught is only getting wider and deeper. Fortunately, at the same time, people are really waking up. But here's some of the other things that the would-be controllers are doing to try to control us and everything else. After 9/11, we had the Patriot Act. I don't think I probably need to mention much, but it started taking away a lot of our so-called rights. And then more recently, Obama signed the NDAA, which now, especially with some recent executive orders, basically authorizes the kidnapping, imprisoning, torturing, and even assassination of anyone who's fundamentally dissenting from the government agenda. So probably most of us in this room are in trouble from that perspective. It begins to point out the huge dichotomy between illegal and immoral. So that's the kidnapping. The FEMA detainment camps are being built and refurbished all over the country. Is that coincidence? The Homeland Security has bought to date, as far as we know, at least 1.6 billion hollow point bullets.
Well, sir, it just upgraded to, as of a few days ago, over 2 billion.
Over 2 billion. So Homeland Security's responsibility is within our borders. So over 2 billion bullets. So when they got busted on this, they said, "Us for target practice." Well, nobody buys hollow point bullets for target practice. They're very expensive, and they explode the whole target rather than they hit. So then now they have a new reason. They're saving us money by buying in bulk. Okay, at least 30,000 drones have been authorized to fly over our heads and spy on us, but I'm sure it's mostly just for kind of traffic control and things like that. Black Hawk helicopter drills have been going on in Minneapolis. The people of Minneapolis weren't even warned, and this is happening in other cities now, so they understand they're freaking out, and the helicopters are doing the military drops of soldiers into the middle of their cities. And I think the main purpose of that is just to condition people so that doesn't look abnormal when military helicopters are dropping soldiers into cities. They're moving tanks all over the country right now. Mass surveillance. Our phones, our email, social media, all of that is collected. That doesn't mean that they're listening to you. They don't have enough people to listen to all of you, and they're probably too busy with me anyway. So, but it's all being collected. They're building a vast news center in Utah now where they can have even more storage space for this. It's on the streets. It's from satellites. It's in your computers. So, you know, what do they want to know? And then basically the training and humiliation that's going on with TSA. I see Glenn in the audience. I was in Australia in November doing a tour over there, and when I arrived in Australia, I needed to fly from one city to another. So it was my first in-country flight. So I get to security and I start stripping down, taking my belt off, putting on my stuff, and everybody goes quiet, and they start cracking up laughing. Especially when I'm handing my wallet to this guy to put it in, and he says, "Mike, you're in Australia. Why do you think you're out? America?" And you can keep your wallet too. And your wallet. When I was in Mexico for the Census 2012, there are jeeps now patrolling the villages and towns with 4 people in the back with automatic weapons, just, soldiers in uniform, just looking to see if anything's happening. I just want to say it's really critical that we not get used to this. And people are organizing more and more to the numbers where we'll be able to take action without it being too threatening for individuals. And the RFID chip. This has been one of the big successes so far, I think, with people standing up and refusing to have mandatory chipping. So, of course, they're trying other ways, and they're still trying to do this. There's a bill right now in the U.S. Congress to try to make anybody on food stamps have to get an internal chip in order to collect their food. So let's, I want to mention one other item first. How many of you are aware of Agenda 21? The kind of hidden agenda? Okay. If you haven't been exposed to that, I highly recommend you look it up, because it's one of the most vast, covert, and dangerous programs that's going on right now. Basically, to take back the resource and the property and private property from individuals and turn it over to the government nationwide. And it's in over 128 cities already, and the whole thing is sponsored by the Rothschild and Rockefeller created UN. So please bring yourself up to speed on that, because they use nice words like sustainable and saving resources, green, and all that. They're stealing all of the meaning of those words.
And they say rewild, you know about that one?
Rewild.
That's about that one. They want to basically put everybody in mega cities and then take
They
that.
want to move everybody into the cities and then take the resources back for the elite. And people are a lot easier to control when you're all piled into buildings and so forth. So let's move on to health, because under the guise of assuring effective health care, our health is under assault. And I was thinking about it this morning. I made some notes as I was coming over here. From this perspective, I went to restaurants to get a little breakfast, and I started seeing from this perspective that I wanted to share with you. So I fixed myself a bowl of gluten, added a little GMO, put some phosphates and pesticides on that, and then I picked up a little side of bovine growth hormone, and a sprinkle of antibiotics, some MSG, some mercury preservatives to make sure it's fresh, and then some food coloring to make sure that it looked good for me. I appreciated that and sweetened that up, put a little high fructose corn syrup on that, washed that down with some aspartame and fluoride. And then I was starting to feel a little queasy on the way over. I took a couple of big deep breaths and looked up. There were 7 chemtrails right over the car where I was coming over. But that's okay. I took my tranquilizers, my antidepressants, and I was feeling great. Oh, my AK-47? No, I'm not packing today. I'm packing my clicker. It's much more dangerous. Okay, for the suppression of cures, so people like Reif and Brzezinski and Case and Hoxie and others who really have viable cures to a lot of different types of viruses and cancers, to the pharma drugging of our children. Over a quarter of American children are now medicated. In adults, it's even higher. And this was not accidental. If you you ever listened to Julian Huxley's speech at Berkeley back in the 60s, this was a very clear agenda that they were speaking about back then. And of course, much of this is leading to the kinds of suicides and homicides that we're seeing tragically all over the country. And of course, the pharma companies have gotten immunities for what they're peddling in terms of the toxic vaccines and so forth. And then there's Codex Alimentarius, an international project to really take over everything that we put in our bodies, our foods, our liquids, and supplements. So if you're not aware of that one, please look that one up too, because it's also global and very dangerous, close to completion.
What is it?
Codex Alimentarius. So what's needed in the healthcare environment? If we look back to the energy thing, instead of exploding carbon and creating all the mess that comes with that, these inventors are recognizing how energy moves in a sustainable system in the universe. They're mimicking that with the right geometries, the right materials, tuning it like a guitar, and then just accessing the infinite abundance of the universe in a clean, safe way. The key there, to me, is the torus. The torus is, as Emily was talking about, the quantum. The quantum means a unit, a oneness, a wholeness. And the oneness that the universe apparently does is the torus at every scale, from subatomic particles to galactic clusters. It's all the torus in nature. So, for me, the key lesson is not just technical application, but the whole lens of wholeness. So when we've got a problem, like all of the health problems, what if we put on the lens of the torus and started looking for the missing wholeness? So suddenly you're becoming aware of alternative healthcare. Like, I'm so glad to see all of the healers and practitioners that are here. And if you're not particularly aware in that area, you could be by the end of this weekend. The natural and holistic preventive health care and healing. Because all of that, what it's doing is honoring the life force and honoring the wholeness of our bodies, the wholeness of our emotional bodies, the wholeness of our mental bodies, fundamentally all the expressions of the wholeness of our spirit. What that ends up leading to, and really what this whole conference is about, is being a whole human being and leading a whole life. So under the guise of ending hunger and creating sustainable living, the powers that would be have created a veritable gauntlet of intentional and dangerous threats, of damage to our fundamental and vital wholeness once again, of our soil, of our food, of our water, of our air, of our medicine. So let's look a little bit at what's going on with the environment. The GMO, I'm so inspired by what the Denver group is doing on GMOs. I've been hearing the story of what's been happening. These people have been going down there while they're trying to prepare this conference. Some of these people are going, like Larry and Trina and others, are going down and spending 7 or 8 hours trying to get GMO labeling here in Colorado. And it wasn't successful this time, but in talking with Thrive groups and other groups all over the world, one of my main messages is that's just the first step. It doesn't mean that the mission is unsuccessful. It's always the way it starts, is laying the groundwork, and then they know what's coming. Then more people start coming in. You start getting more media, and the truth will out. So I really congratulate you on all that you're doing. There are over 40 groups in the Thrive Network around the world who are working just on the GMO issue. So, about that more soon, because the mission of our Solutions Hub is to provide a technology that allows all those people to connect with each other and amplify the power of each individual and each group to become local, regional, global, depending on what you're ready for. That's kind of a small picture, but that's a fluoride vat and dumping in the water. And then there's the good old chemtrails. This issue gets my goat almost more than anyone, especially because I walk out every day And I would say 5 out of 7 days a week, this is what it looks like over my house. This is my house. And then, some people still say to me, well, I think it's just the airplanes. I think it's just the jets. Isn't that the contrails? Well, this pilot apparently forgot something. And he continued to do that around Monterey Bay for the entire afternoon. And I'll talk more about that in a moment, too, because for me, chemtrails is the second most dangerous issue on the planet. Only after nuclear radiation and nuclear weapons, because it is global, it's persistent, it's well-funded, and we're all breathing this stuff. And this is HAARP, the antenna array that's up in Alaska, but there's actually quite a few antenna arrays around the world now where they're shaping the weather, where they're causing earthquakes, weaponizing it all. This is an example of what HAARP does when it sends a high-pressure bubble up into the atmosphere. What I'm encouraging people to do is just get in the habit of when you look at the problem, and it looks dire, and I always hate talking about this kind of stuff, except in the context of solution. I'm highly trained as a martial artist, and I know that the first imperative of protecting yourself and your loved ones is an accurate assessment of reality. So I like to know as much as I can about what's going on around me so that we can create effective solutions. So in the area of environment, if we take that, we've been looking through the lens of the global domination agenda, because fortunately, the good news is there's a very few people who are doing this agenda. If you think, oh, humanity isn't worth it, not so at all. It's a very few sick people who have gained control of the money system and the military and so forth for quite a while, and we didn't know it. So they've created all this destruction. Now people are waking up and we know it. And we outnumber them over 1,000,000 to 1. So once you know how to look through the global domination agenda, then it's important that you also then take that lens off and look through the lens of the torus, look through the lens of wholeness. So what do we need to do in the environment? What does honoring wholeness look like? It looks like honoring the wholeness of an ecosystem, of the wholeness of hydrological cycles, of the wholeness of our atmosphere, which protects us. The wholeness of organic seeds, of polyculture growing rather than monoculture, of whole foods, of honest labeling, and prosecution for those who violate individual rights or ecosystems by attempting to poison our soil, our air, our water, our food, our children, and ourselves. So, under the guise of creating financial stability, the Federal Reserve and other national central banks have created fiat currency, which means made up out of nothing. And that's rather than a commodity-backed currency. And the reason they did that, and took us off the gold standard and so forth, is so that they can completely manipulate the system while sucking up the real wealth out of other people's lives. And so that comes down as the financial collapses, the bailouts, what we see going on in Greece and Europe. And if anybody has bought into the notion that Ben Bernanke said last week that, well, this recovery is looking good, and gold dipped down a little bit, the stock market went up a little bit. It's like fiat money. That's a fiat philosophy. He just made that up out of nothing because that's his job. There's nothing that I see that justifies a real recovery right now, other than some moves that the Asian royalty is starting to do to obsolete the Western Illuminati. That's another whole topic, but we can get into it another time. But there are glimmers of a complete global financial reboot that would really help us at this point. Let's put it that way. So what's the answer then? Besides, the financial cavalry riding over the hill, I mean, what can each one of us do? So once again, put on the lens of the torus, of wholeness, and you have a whole money system, which simply means honest money. I'm not one of these believers in, we just got to get rid of money because money is evil. Like grandmother was talking about, try going a month without any money and see how that works out. Money is not evil. Dishonest money is destructive. What I think is needed is voluntary exchange. I just finished reading a new book that's quite good by Bernard Lietaer. and Jackie Dunn, and it's called Rethinking Money. And the term that they use in there, which is a lot of what we've been talking about in Thrive also, is what's needed is a diverse monetary ecology. People are always asking, well, what is the right type of currency? You know, is it a credit system? Is it gold? Is it silver? Is it platinum? Is it fiat? What is it? And to me, that's like asking, who should control the weather? What's the right kind of weather? No, we're living in this blessing of beauty and balance and harmony that took billions of years to create on this planet. And an economy is the results of billions of human decisions voluntarily made on a daily basis. And anybody who tries to control that leads to as much disaster as trying to control the weather. And we're seeing that in the world now. If I had said this 10 years ago, people would have thought I was crazy. But now, pretty much people recognize that trying to centrally control the global economy is ignorant on the one hand, but if it's conscious, then it's really evil. It's destructive on the other hand, and that's what I think we're looking at. So what I'm suggesting is create whatever currency you want. Create whatever bank you want, as long as it's honest. And then the ones that are reliable will float to the surface as most successful. That's what happens in an honest free market. We don't have honest free market. We don't have honest capitalism. So also don't please buy into the notion, well, capitalism didn't work. We haven't had capitalism. We've had state intervention, control, crony capitalism with all the bailouts and subsidies and corruption that is now surfacing. So, and then people think, well, you're not for any regulation. No, I am absolutely for rulers. I mean for rules. I just don't like rulers. And the rules wouldn't be arbitrarily, people telling people arbitrarily what they can and can't do, except in the protection of integrity and individual rights. So you would have prosecution for fraud. So if somebody continued to do what the Federal Reserve is doing, which is not only fraud but counterfeit, they would be in jail. The people who did all the mortgage fraud, they would be in jail. All of those big banks would be out of business, and those people would be in jail serving time and paying the rest of us back. So for those of you who may not be familiar with this image, it was from an animation in the film. We tried hard for a long time to reduce the money scam down to a single picture. And basically what this is a diagram. I don't know if you can read it in the back. People, planet, and all living things. That's us down here going about our daily lives. And then we think, oh, Obama must be the most powerful person in the free world, or maybe the whole world, because he heads up the government. What's important to know, and it's becoming also more obvious, especially after the Citizens United decision, is that he works for the corporations. That's who funds his elections, that's who he answers to. And when someone with his kind of charisma and everything that comes in and hires the people from Goldman Sachs and the Federal Reserve to fix the economy, and hires the people from Monsanto to be in charge of agriculture, it's a pretty good hint, and I could go on and on. It's a pretty good hint that he works for them. But that's not the top of the pyramid. They have to get their loans from the big banks at discount rates, so the banks then end up controlling them. And the big banks that we're familiar with, Goldman Sachs, Chase, and Citigroup, Wells Fargo, and so forth, they are beholden to the central banks, like the Federal Reserve. But of all major countries in the world, there are only, in 2001, there were 7 countries left that weren't a part of the Rothschild International Central Banking System. Now there's only 2 left, because the rest have been taken down. The 2 that are left are Iran and North Korea. And why are those 2 left? Because we're a little hesitant to invade them, at least so far. Definitely not with North Korea, because they've got nuclear weapons and a million-man army. Is it any wonder that any little country, especially with resources, would want to get their hands on the nuclear weapons to protect themselves from the agenda? Okay, then they answer to the international central banks, the World Bank and the IMF, and then at the top of the banking heap is the Bank for International Settlements, which most people have never heard of, but they really are the central bank of central banks, and they control the entire pyramid. You know, who's that? Well, they operate behind closed doors because they don't want you to know who they are. If you find out who they are and what they're doing, their future's not going to look good. And that's exactly what's going on right now with over 500 high-level banking resignations just in the last year and a half. They are literally taking their money and running for their compounds, their underground cities, whatever it is, because the truth is coming out. So in the past, the wealth has gone up, the domination and control has gone down, but that, I'm happy to say, is changing. So Chris Hedges, who's a former New York Times reporter, put it this way recently. He said, "We now live in a nation where doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, governments destroy freedom, the press destroys information, religion destroys morals, and our banks destroy the economy." Yeah, I think it's pretty accurate. It's not the whole story, but it's part of the story that we need to be really aware of. So let me just ask you, how have you been feeling recently? Has anyone in the room been feeling a little bit confused? Raise your hand if you've experienced some confusion recently, okay? How about angry? I find myself feeling some of that as I learn more and more. And how about sad? And the loss of a dream. How about afraid? I know I deal with it. How about motivated? I know I'm feeling it. Yeah, this is what I'm seeing all over the place. And how about informed? Raise your hand if you're feeling really more and more informed. Okay, I think that's what we need. So let me talk a little bit about Thrive's response to this. Because all of this is why we made Thrive. We made Thrive to expose what's really going on, to empower those who are ready to create effective solutions based on wholeness as embodied in the Torus, and to save people time. I was blessed with the opportunity to pull on these threads for decades, but I know how long it takes and how much work it is, and I really didn't want everybody else to have to recreate that because we don't have that kind of time. You know, I meet people who've been doing it for longer than I have, and I just admire them for putting up with the loneliness and the misunderstanding and everything that you've had to put up with. And now you're the teachers for the rest of us, those who've been doing the homework for a long time. So what we're looking to in terms of solutions is free energy, organic polyculture, holistic healthcare, sound currency, and voluntary exchange with no fraud or counterfeit, and protecting ecosystems. Yeah. So let me give you a little quick update on Thrive, because someone asked me, one of our musicians who did the score, when we were working on this score before the movie came out, he said, "What are you afraid of after this movie comes out?" And I think he meant, security-wise. But the first thing that came to my mind was the only thing I really feel deeply afraid of is if this comes out and it's ignored. Well, I'm happy to report that that hasn't happened. Thrive has been seen by over 13 million people that we can document. That means one person per DVD, and obviously you know that if you're showing it to your family and friends and doing community screenings and so forth, it's probably more like over 20 million. But it's being seen by at least 1 million people a month, and that's growing in 23 languages around the world. So we are really... And all along, we intended for the movie to be a trailer for the website. As you see a movie, maybe you can see it 3 or 4 times, which you hear a lot, but still then it was a movie that you saw. The website is intended to be an organic tool to support the movement, and the movement is not some top-down, centrally controlled thing. It's our attempt to offer the best tools, the best principles, and the best guidance we can to empower self-creating movements all over the world. There are only 2 criteria that we have for joining the movement. One is if you use the sector names, which I'll go into in a minute, that you use the same sector names that we do so that we can coordinate activity worldwide. Because if everybody's using different names, then you can't easily get together. And the second one is that your solutions cannot contain any new violations. No initiation of force, no violence. It may include, for a period of time, using tax monies, but taking tax money that's going down to the military, to the Federal Reserve, that type of thing, and moving that over for a transitional period to taking care of those who've been most damaged by the corruption and subsidizing things like a return to organic farming instead of GMOs. Okay, so my purpose today is to help you know yourself more deeply so that you can find the best use of you as a vehicle for transformation at this critical time in human history. So I want to tell you a quick story to ground it out, because I know we've all heard a lot of wonderful and inspiring talks, and that's absolutely necessary. One of the things that excites me so much is that is the grounding out of this solutions model that we experienced in 2007. In 2007, in the Northern California area, started in Monterey and then came to Santa Cruz, it was announced that we would be being sprayed from airplanes. And it was announced, I think, the day before they started spraying. And then all night, these planes would drone back and forth, dropping who knows what on our heads. And we didn't like that anyway, because we weren't asked and we didn't know what was in it. But then children started being taken to the hospital. Chemically sensitive people started collapsing. And fish were washing up on the ocean. Birds were dropping. Birds and bees were dropping out of the sky. And there were a lot of us kind of running around trying to do something, trying to get a court hearing and so forth. And it really wasn't working. So my dear Kimberly said, Foster, why don't we gather people in our living room and teach them the sector model and see if that will help cohere the activity. So a few nights later we did. 30 local activists came and we taught them the sector model that we referred to briefly in the film, but I'll show it to you in a minute. And we showed them the sector model, they loved it, and 3 nights later we had a town hall meeting in Santa Cruz. Over 300 people came, we had some informative speakers, and then we had 12 tables. Justice, art, science, health, media, economics, and so forth. So the people who were motivated to do something could sign up according to their passion and their prowess. And that's the day that this random activism, which was not being successful, turned into really a laser beam of effectiveness. And the first thing we accomplished was petition to then Governor Schwarzenegger to stop the spray and at least temporarily and tell us what was in it. Because the owner of the chemical company, who's he's a whole other story, but he's exactly who you'd expect him to be. He said, we can't tell because it's our patent, it's our secret. We can't tell you what we're spraying that you're having to breathe. Well, and they were going to spray us for 9 months a year. And they were authorized for up to 10 years. And this was well, I'll save that. So we got them to stop it, and they revealed the contents. It was a 10-chemical cocktail, 6 of which were toxic. There were carcinogens, which give you cancer. There were mutagens, which change your genes. And there were, as we expected, endocrine disruptors, which can render you infertile. So when we had met, I joined the economics sector and started following the money. We had a wonderful team that just went after it. It only took us about 2.5 weeks to trace the money all the way back to where I was afraid it went to. This was a personal earmark from George Bush Jr.
I knew it.
Expropriating $1 billion from Homeland Security, running it through the USDA, which gets 5% royalty on GMOs, if that gives you any sense of who the USDA is really working for. And then through the California Department of Food and Agriculture to spray us. And they said it was just a harmless pheromone to get rid of this little tiny brown apple moth that was supposedly going to devastate California agriculture and sweep the country. Well, it hadn't actually done any damage to date, but obviously they had our best interests in mind, and so they started spraying anyway. And so when we created these sectors, the science team immediately took off for New Zealand, where they had this kind of event before. And the apple moth had done some damage in New Zealand, but when our scientists got there, they found out, this is the whole key, it's like, keep going for the truth until you find it, because once you find it, you're going to have a story that the media wants, and you're going to have the key to restoring the wholeness. So what happened there was that the only time they had a problem with this moth was when they overused phosphate fertilizers when in monoculture farming. So they destroyed insect ecology, then they destroyed the soil, and then they actually poisoned the plants they were working on, so that the insects didn't have a chance. So of course they went out of balance. So they finally realized this and restored polyculture farming, multiple crops in a field, stopped using the phosphate fertilizer, went back to organic. The insects went back into balance immediately. So we did a presentation on this for the California Department of Food and Agriculture. They weren't interested at all. They had a 10-year budget. They had new trucks and planes and all this kind of stuff. So that's when we realized that, okay, this is a bigger game. So then the lawyers filed lawsuits. And once we had a good story, then the media team started working, and the art teams could support them. The art team was creating flyers and films and graphics and just amazing things. And what we did, we started having protests, and this is the key. This is on the feminine energy level. When the moms got involved, that was it. That was the tipping point. I have not yet seen a stronger force in the universe than moms protecting their kids. So when they started coming to these protests with their kids in strollers and so forth, the media was all over. They couldn't resist. That was on the Golden Gate Bridge. We took over the Golden Gate, the sidewalks on the Golden Gate Bridge for an afternoon. And it was side to side, spanned the entire bridge. Okay, so these are the 12 sectors, and they match the vector equilibrium. Those of you who've seen the film, the vector equilibrium is the mother of all geometries. You won't see it in nature because it's the one that all the other geometries come from. A lot of string theory is studying the symmetry groups, which are the crystal symmetries, and they're all contractions out of the infinite void. The geometry of the infinite void is the vector equilibrium, because all of its vectors, all of its energy lines are in equilibrium. Well, matter is not in equilibrium. Matter is born and then dies, and it's under pressure that whole time. So, but the vector equilibrium is the geometry which stabilizes a hub. So that's why we have 12 sectors with one worldview in the middle. And here it is on a wheel. And here's where I'd like to begin asking you to empower yourself by further self-identifying. So, here are the 12 sectors around one. Health, infrastructure, justice, media, relations, science, spirituality, arts, economics, education, environment, and governance. And then whatever sector you're particularly interested in, you're going to be seeing that sector through your own worldview. So worldview is at the center. That's the 13th. So what I'd like you to do is ask yourself for a moment. If you're already active, you may already know this. If you want to get active, if you were going to, which sector would draw you most? Now, you may be interested in 3 sectors. I was born a comprehensivist, so I'm interested in them all. And that's why I'm working on that aspect of it. But I invite you to identify which sector you feel most compelled by. And then actually write that down. I awoke and found that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. And that's, I think, what's going on for a lot of people on the planet right now. This chore of, I really should go out and do something for the planet. Imagine if you just went inside and really found out what your bliss is. Find the problem that touches you the most, and then work on that, not in a crazy way, not burning yourself out, but in a way that balances with the rest of your life, so you can actually be thriving. You can be a thriving implement while being a role model for a thriving world. And that's what's happening. And that way it will be sustainable. Well, let me say one more thing about the sectors. When we met in sectors, the key was having the sectors and having a schedule. That's really the Denver group can tell you. Once you do those 2 things, then the energy of the group, it's like accessing free energy or something like that. And what we did was each group would meet once a week, each sector, at least once a week. like our economics group, we would meet and be working on following the money for the month thing. And then a representative from our group would go on Sunday night to meet with the Synergy team, this kind of a steering committee where each of us would report from our sector into a central committee. There's no authoritarian structure here. There's no leader other than a facilitator. But then strategy could take place with awareness of what was going on in all sectors. Then each person would take that information back out, and that toroidal flow would happen on a weekly basis. And then about once a month, we get together with the entire community. Okay, so let's talk for a moment about the Solutions Hub that I referred to. So these are some screen grabs from the Solutions Hub. When you go there, you can just explore around and see if it's something that you want to join. I highly encourage you to both sign up for our email list so that you, if you're interested in knowing what's going on with the movement, we will not spam you. You'll maybe get one email a week or something like that, but when we send something out, we think it's really important. And also visit our Facebook page. How are we going to transition from the world that we're in to a truly free, prosperous, healthy world? In our film, and in great depth on the website, in every single sector, we not only identify critical issues, but we suggest solution strategies, all of them in a three-stage kind of business plan. And I want to just highlight that for a moment, because so often we're seeing that that great initiatives and high intention gets bogged down in conflicted behavior because people either aren't making decisions effectively, they're not resolving conflict, or they've got political differences. And the key to one of the keys to the Thrive movement is it's not a political movement. You know, when Thrive first came out, we were first attacked by the right for having people who identify as left-wing in the movement. And then the left-wing caught on, and we had right-wing people in the movement. And so we were taking it from both sides for a while, and finally people are starting to relax and get that we never set out to make a political movement. All of our solutions are based on principles, fundamentally integrity and freedom, rather than whether you think the right should have the power to coerce other people to do what they want, or the left should have the power to coerce other people to do what they want, or libertarians or independents or whatever. Our movement is about transcending the illusion of this political polarity, which is all in its essence about a few people having the rights that the rest of us don't have to initiate violence and coercion. That's led to all of these problems, and 200 million deaths in the 20th century alone within the boundaries of governments. So that's what I'm going to be working on a lot in these next 2 years. I'm writing either a large paper or a small book about the liberty perspective right now, trying to give clear examples to help people move beyond this old political polarity, because people are recognizing that it's not only just that it's a gridlock system, it was a broken system from the beginning. If you think somebody coming and taking your hard-earned money without your permission is theft, which most people do, if all of the governments of the world, which most of us are indoctrinated to think are absolutely necessary for our survival, only exist because they come and take your money whether or not you like it, without your permission, then no wonder we're in a very, very lethal situation on the planet. So that's a huge topic, which I look forward to exploring more, and that's what I'm going to be writing and blogging a lot about. And we're going to be creating a whole Thrive TV channel, where I'm going to be having conversations with people from all political persuasions, all different disciplines and so forth, who have in common that they're more interested in truth than being right, and that they're looking for transition strategies which can be effective, and they're capable of having respectful conversations even if we disagree. So what we propose in our three-stage strategy is that the first stage is really honoring the kind of essence of the traditional sort of progressive liberal democratic approach, which has spent a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how to do good with other people's money. And that's fine for a transition stage as long as we're using other people's money. We recommend dwindling that strategy down very fast. But meanwhile, as I mentioned before, there's lots of better things that we can do that can be done with our tax money. How do we really feel about killing 1 million innocent people in Iraq with our money? We paid for that. And if you haven't recognized that and worked on it emotionally, start now. because that's part of the motivation for finding a new system. That's reconciling the inner integrity, inner longing for freedom with the real outer freedom. So then, as we're dwindling down this whole notion of involuntary taxation, government is shrinking. And it's moving more toward what the traditional Republican, right-wing conservative movement was in its ethical essence, which is sound currency, no foreign wars of aggression, protecting the environment. I mean, this is old time. This is not what you see in the radical right now. That's not what I'm talking about at all. But it's moving back toward a republic rather than a majority rule. A democracy. We've been taught to worship democracy, where democracy, some people have said, is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner.
Benjamin Franklin.
It's hard, particularly for Americans, but democracy is mob rule. And if that's more important than individual rights, then you grow into the sort of police state that we're on the verge of right now. So how do we take that step beyond that? We've come so far toward liberty and justice for all, but we're not all the way there, and I don't think we'll get there until we actually strategically transcend the whole notion of authoritarian government. So then the third phase, I think as we're going along, and those are overlapping tracks, but they're both dwindling, I think we'll discover that there are true free market, voluntary, non-violent solutions to all of these problems that are made possible when you get rid of the authoritarian state. So explore those three stages at your convenience, because that's a conversation which people are just beginning to enter into, and I think it's critical. So I'm not going to take the time to do the last question that I was going to ask you, but I invite you to do it on your own, which is to write down what is a stand that you would be willing to make today. And maybe one that you're already involved in. It may be one that now that you're getting clear on what sector and what level you'd be most interested in. What stand would you be willing to publicly say to someone else, I'm going to stand for this. I'm going to accomplish this. So I encourage you to do that on your own. We don't have time to go into it today. So I want to do two other things, and then I'll wrap up real quick. One is people are asking me and Kimberly a lot, with all you know, what gives you hope? And my quick answer to that is 5 key things. Number one, my absolute and only increasing deep experience of the power, of the resiliency, and of the deep love of the human spirit. Number two is that we outnumber the perpetrators of this agenda at least 1,000,000 to 1, and people are waking up. Number three is that we have the truth and the life force on our side. It's absolutely exhausting for them to spend all the money and all the force to try to keep deceiving us and to actually go against the life force in every single area. And then finally, this sector model, which isn't like just our idea. We developed this with at least a dozen organizations, Barbara Marx Hubbard and others over the last decade. But it's not an invention, it's a recognition. We just aligned it with the torus and the vector equilibrium, and it turns out that the whole system approach is much more effective. So I wanted to finish with a poem that means a lot to me, by Donna Markova. I will not live an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. So thank you very much for your attention.